Hello and welcome to another episode of Geography Made Easy. In these videos, we try to make difficult geographical concepts easy. In today's video, I will be discussing a part of the Environmental Studies CVAC paper of University of Calcutta. This is chapter number 4, Biodiversity. We will be discussing this chapter in terms of the syllabus given in CU, but this video can be useful for any student who is studying biogeography or any student from any other university or UPSC who has environment as one of their papers. Firstly, I would like to understand, and we will be discussing about what is the meaning of the word biodiversity. So biodiversity is defined as the variety and variability of all living organisms. So the type, the number of all living organisms in an ecosystem complex or in a particular area, in a particular ecosystem where they occur. Earth's biodiversity is rich and there are many species that are yet to be discovered, but we have to understand that a lot of the species are threatened and they have a fear of becoming extinct soon due to human activities. So the biodiversity of the earth is at risk. We will try to understand what are the different types of biodiversity. There are three types of biodiversity. The first one is the genetic biodiversity, the second is the species, and the third is the ecosystem. We will discuss each in the next slides. The genetic diversity is when the genes of the same species show different versions or there are many different types. And we have Darwin's finches. This is the example which I have picked up. Same species, but we can have different or varieties of the bird. So this is seen in the animal kingdom very commonly. So this is one of the type of genetic diversities which is present. Next we have species diversity. So within a particular ecosystem, the different kinds of flora and fauna which lives in that area, that is defined as species diversity, and mostly by biodiversity we understand more about the species diversity. So it is ecosystem specific. Certain ecosystems will have more biodiversity compared to the others, but it is important that the biodiversity of this ecosystem is well maintained. Next is the ecosystem diversity. The different types of ecosystems which exist, that is known as my ecosystem diversity. So the complexity of the ecosystems and the variations which can be present. So we can have within one pond different types of ecosystems like freshwater. We can have littoral zones. So according to the zones of the light which enters the pond, we can have different kinds of plants and animals living in that area. So this is known as the ecosystem diversity. So within one large ecosystem, within one, for example, jungle or forest, we can have a multiple number of ecosystems. So this is known as the ecosystem diversity. Ecosystem diversity is very much linked to an abiotic property which is known as the geodiversity. Geodiversity is the geographical nature of the landscape and the diversity attached to this. So the different types of geographical diversity which is present in a particular area, the more different types of biodiversity or ecosystem biodiversity we will be able to see. We are very lucky in India that we have a number of these biodiversity zones, and these biodiversity zones are called the biogeographical regions. These biogeographical regions, if we look at the classifications, they are divided on the basis of the different kinds of landscapes. So we have the 10 biodiversity or biogeographical regions. We have the Trans-Himalayas, we have the Himalayas, we have the deserts, we have the semi-arid regions, we have Western Ghats, we have Deccan Plateau, we have Gangetic Plain, coastlines, northeast and islands. And I will be showing you some of the photos of these different biogeographical regions. Each region has its own unique set of ecosystem and biodiversity. So biodiversity regions, they correspond with the physical regions of India. They have a close relationship with the geodiversity. Now let us look at the different kinds of biodiversity regions. We have already discussed, we have these 10 types of biodiversity regions in India. The first one is an example of the Trans-Himalayas. This is in Sikkim. So we have a particular type of landscapes to which certain types of species live in this landscape. Next we have the Himalayas. Again, within the Himalayas there can be different kinds of biodiversity or biogeographical zones. We limit ourselves to one type and we broadly classify it as the Himalayas. Then we have the deserts. Then we have the semi-arid regions. We have the Western Ghats. We have the plateaus. We have the Deccan Plateau, the Chota Nagpur Plateau. Again, we can understand that the biogeographical regions look very different, and according to the landscape, the biodiversity is also very different. We have the northern or the Gangetic Plains. We have the islands. We have the coastlines. So, we till date know that there are 1.5 million species, and out of that 50 to 80% of these 1.5 million species of this global biodiversity, they live in the rainforests. So the rainforests are very important areas where we see very high biodiversity, and this reduces as we move towards extreme climates, extremely cold or extremely hot. The biodiversity is low. Now let us discuss biodiversity hotspots. These hotspots, this is a very important part of this chapter. So we have 4 biodiversity hotspots in India or in the Indian subcontinent. We have the Himalayas, we have the Indo-Burma region, we have the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, and we have the Sundaland. So these are the places where the biodiversity is the highest. That is why it is called the hotspot, biodiversity hotspot. Where the concentration of the biodiversity is very high, it is called a hotspot. Just like we can have a Wi-Fi hotspot from where the Wi-Fi, the signal is the strongest. Similarly, the biodiversity hotspots has the maximum number of plants and animal species in the entire Indian subcontinent. So India is a mega diversity nation with a number of different types of plants and animals living in this country. Now let us look at a number of concepts. The first concept here regarding this is endemism. So what is endemism? Endemism is the condition of being endemic or being restricted in a particular geographical area. Endemism is an ecological classification. It describes the range or the distribution of species or a group of species. So we have a number of endemic species in India. We have the Asiatic lion, we have the Nilgiri tar, and we have the wild ass of the Gujarat. So these are seen only in this particular area and nowhere else in the world. In the wild, of course, we are not talking about the zoological conservation method, but in the wild we see them in particular areas only, and they are restricted to these geographical regions. Next, we have a very important concept, which is endangered species. An endangered species is a species that is very likely to become extinct in the near future. So endangered species are at high risk because of these reasons: habitat loss, poaching, and invasive species. So they are losing their habitats because of anthropogenic activities. There is incessant amount of poaching or killing, especially of large mammals, and there can be certain species which are invading into their territory, which are foreign, but which actually are becoming their competitors and occupying their ecosystem, and they are dying out. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, makes a list which is called the Red List, where we can find the status of these species and also what, whether it is endangered, whether it is extinct. We will find this list, and from time and again it is published. A species which is at high risk may may become extinct, or if conservation methods are done properly, may become may be removed from that particular list. So human activity is a significant cause in causing some species to become endangered. Now let us discuss the threats to biodiversity according to the IUCN category. So we have the link. If you click on this link, you will be able to see the red list. What are the factors which are the threats to biodiversity? Habitat destruction by cutting down forests, by making roads, by mining, etc. Invasive species, we have already discussed about this. Overexploitation of the natural and the forest resources leaves the resources depleted, and we see biodiversity dying. Illegal wildlife trade, which is still prevalent in the world, where we see that many people are still killing animals to be sold in the black market. Pollution is one of the most important reasons at this moment for a lot of species to become extinct, and one of the reasons why species are dying is also the plastic pollution, especially in the oceans and the seas. We can see this happening. And of course, climate change is also posing a threat to the species. So in order to conserve the species, we can do conservation. And there are two types of conservation which can be done. One is the in situ conservation and the other is the ex situ. When the conservation is done in site or in situ, in the ecosystem itself, for the maintenance and recovery of the population of the species, it is called in situ conservation. When conservation is done outside the natural biological area where the particular species lived, it is called an ex situ conservation. And for some of the examples of the ex situ conservations are zoo, captive breeding, aquarium, botanical garden, and gene bank. So even these methods are being applied to conserve the species. Next, we have a concept called the protected area network. So protected areas are those areas, places where there is minimum or no human habitation or resource exploitation for the protection of the biodiversity in that area. So India has at currently 1015 protected areas with 106 national parks, 5573 wildlife sanctuaries, 115 conservation reserves, and 220 community reserves. Together they formed the protected area network. But not all of the protected areas have no human habitation. Sometimes indigenous populations, they are allowed to live at a particular area, or but for conservation purposes, this is they are trying to reduce the impact of human beings in the areas which are core areas of the forests and so on. Role of indigenous communities in biodiversity conservation. We have to understand that the biodiversity conservation can only be done when we take into account the indigenous communities who live in close contact with the biodiversity. For example, These people who live in the jungles or who are the indigenous communities, and for many years they have been, their ancestors have been living in these areas, they have knowledge about the whereabouts of the different species, about their hunting patterns, about their lifestyles, and in their own lifestyles they have integrated nature, and thus their impact or footprint or ecological footprint or carbon footprint is minimum. This is an example where we know that certain parts of forests are considered sacred, and they are called the sacred groves, and they are not allowed to be cut down. This is a way of biodiversity conservation which is rooted in the religion and the lifestyle of these indigenous communities. We need to understand and learn from these indigenous communities, work in close contact with them, and make sure that the marginalized communities, they do not face any threat because of our actions along with biodiversity. Sometimes we see that the indigenous communities, some of the communities become hunters, and it is also a part of their natural way of living, but these people become the best kind of people who can actually conserve nature. So this is something which needs to be looked into. What can we do to understand that biodiversity is important? We as individuals, we can do a kind of documentation which is called the People's Biodiversity Register. The People's Biodiversity Register or PBR is a register with names of species and their distribution in a given area, so that you can get a comprehensive database for understanding the status of the species, the history, the changes, and every individual actually can make this biodiversity register for their own locality and for their own area, so that they can better help the local governing bodies as well as NGOs, and even do certain kinds of conservation methods on their own to understand that what kind of species are living where and what harmful impact they are creating towards these species who live there. Next, we have another concept in the syllabus which is called bioprospecting. And this is from a paper. I will directly quote from there. Bioprospecting is the exploration of biodiversity for new resources of social and commercial value. It is carried out by a wide range of industries such as pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, agriculture, um, aquaculture, etc. So, using biodiversity to create new resource for social and commercial value, that is called biodiversity. So one of the regions where prospecting is mostly seen is the pharmaceuticals, and this is a area, growing area. For example, in our country we have Ayurveda and the Ayush Mantralaya, a ministry of uh, the Ministry of Ayush Mantralaya, they look into this, using this indigenous knowledge for bioprospecting methods, creating new medicine which is better for the health, and you using the knowledge which is there in Ayurveda into uh, into commercial, in converting it into a commercial value. Similarly, we can have like use Unani, another indigenous ancient knowledge. So these knowledge which is present can be used for commercial values. It is called bioprospecting. One of the problems with bioprospecting is that it can lead to what we know as the biopiracy, or also known as scientific colonialism. It is the unauthorized appropriation of knowledge and genetic resource of farming and indigenous communities by individuals or institutions. So when we are commercializing uh, the knowledge of the indigenous communities, because the knowledge is just there, sometimes we see that biopiracy takes place, And many a times we have seen that this kind of situation has arisen where we see that a particular patent has been released, and this knowledge actually did not belong to the person or the company who has patented it for themselves. Rather, it was something lying, it was something which was there, lying in the knowledge of the indigenous community. Hence, biopiracy is called scientific colonialism, using the indigenous knowledge to gain scientifically and to actually commercially make a lot of gain. So we have patents or intellectual property being kind of just stolen, and this is something which can occur if bioprospecting is not done properly. So if you have any doubts and questions, please feel free to write in the comment section, and if you like the video, please share the video with your friends. Thank you very much.